color, buddy. The color. Hi everyone, Monthony Dad Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Dan Deacon album, Gliss Riffer. Dan Deacon is an electronic music producer and composer, and I heard of him in the mid-2000s the same way many people did, through a viral video of Dan delivering this insane performance on some local NBC affiliate morning show, which was absolute insanity, and thanks to this video, there was a little bit of an infatuation with who Dan was and what his music was like, and just why is he so strange. Not too long after this video and the growing hype between Dan's back catalog, he signed with Car Park Records, where he would bring his wacky, densely layered pop visions to life with a much better recording on the absurdly titled Spider-Man of the Rings, which actually had a really awesome single with the song Crystal Cat. Dan most definitely had a knack for this psychedelic, futuristic, colorful pop music, but his real ambitions lied in some other cuts on this album, specifically the song Wham City, which was a long 12-minute, layered, mostly instrumental number that was pretty well put together, very fun, and showed that Dan had a kind of a growing passion for instrumental composition and minimalism. I think Dan's compositions are maybe a little too varied and feature too much progression to be truly minimalistic, but he is certainly inspired by the small, microscopic, hypnotic repetitions in that style of composition. And when Dan tried to launch in that stylistic direction with his next full-length LP in 2009, Brahms, it was actually a huge success and really his breakout record. However, the album was not really that enjoyable to me personally, with one layer on top of another layer on top of another layer of hot, buzzing synthesizers. This made most of the songs kind of obnoxious to me, difficult to untangle, and it gave me about as much ear fatigue as an hour-long Merzbow listening session. And even though it felt a little more well put together, I felt roughly the same way with the follow-up album America just a few years ago. However, Dan grabbed my attention once again when it came to some of the songs leading up to the release of this new album right here. While I may not have loved them, it seemed like Dan was changing stylistic directions, maybe going back to what people knew of him when he first came out with Spider-Man of the Rings. He was writing more concise songs. There was a very clear vocal presence too. It sounded like Dan was drifting back to the ecstatic, overwhelming pop compositions that I knew him for early on. And that's pretty much the case with Gliss Riffer. For the most part, Dan mines through his synthesizers on this record for some of the brightest timbres he can muster, and then he bakes them into these incredibly sweet, funfetti cakes of textural happiness. And there's some positive results on this LP. There's the song When I Was Done Dying, which reminds me quite a bit of Wham City, with these large, spirited group vocals and a really huge rhythmic backing section. It's actually a pretty sweet song, but some of the other tracks on here that are about the same length are kind of empty, just unfulfilling, a lot like the song Feel the Lightning, which features Dan and a guest vocalist singing very lethargically, just mired in effects behind a wall of synthesizers. And a lot of the time on this LP, while Dan may hit you with a lot of very bright sounds, his compositions aren't really that ambitious, or chord progressions. Still though, the plethora of sounds that Dan may hit you with can be pretty impressive sometimes. I actually think this is the best Dan has sounded since Spider-Man of the Rings when it comes to sounds being mixed, EQ'd, balanced. I don't feel like I'm being hit with one sound after another of the same flavor just thrown on top of one another. There's actually breathing room in the mix here between each sound. It's not a claustrophobic recording like I feel like I got on Brahms in America. And this is a nice change of pace for Dan. For me, it actually makes his songs listenable and tolerable, even if the vocals can be kind of obnoxious sometimes. And while a better sound doesn't necessarily mean for better writing, I certainly enjoy one of the instrumental closing tracks off of here, Take It to the Max. It's really bustling, it's busy. I think it's one of Dan Deacon's best instrumental compositions in a while, and the closing track here is actually a pretty evocative instrumental swell and drone. So from a sonic standpoint, I think Dan is definitely sounding better, fuller, but some of the songs here I don't really think are that hot. I wish they escalated a little further, like the song Meme Generator, which, as hilarious as that song is titled, the music itself is in a sense reserved, at least by Dan Deacon standards. While I do think this record sees Dan Deacon changing for the better when it comes to sonic clarity, this is his best release yet. But for me, this is a change that's so long overdue, something that should have been on Brahms or at least America. Because while I do acknowledge this improvement, I don't think he's putting out his best material here. To me, the vocally led tracks on here don't really match up to his early work, and while a few of the compositions do definitely stand out, they're nowhere near as lively as what people perceive to be his best material. Dan Deacon really is just kind of treading a bit of water for me on this LP, even if the sound is remarkably improved. I'm feeling a strong 5 to a light 6 on this thing. Transition. If you've given this album a listen, what did you think of it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? What do you think I should review next? And that's it. You're the best. I hope you have a good day. And I hope you enjoyed this record more than me. Definitely give it a try. If you didn't dig this record, definitely try out some of Dan Deacon's earlier stuff. Maybe you'll even like Brahms more than me if you've never heard of it before, if you're looking for some crazy electronic compositions. Cool. Anthony Fantano, Dan Deacon, Gliss Riffer, forever.